welcome to One More Thing. This is Larry Baucom. I'm here with Troy Doucet, two PhDs, talking about the series that we've just completed this weekend. And Troy, I need to tell you, I thought you were magnificent. I thought the series was the best that you've done, and a lot of work, a lot of study came in, but the personality and life stories that you told, I just loved it. And, of course, I really loved it because I've been off for 4 weeks, and I was on a cruise for some of that time with my family and grandkids and enjoyed that. But coming back, it just gives me great comfort to know, the guy that's speaking for me is engaging. And the big joke I tell people, I said, the attendance is growing when I'm gone. I got to come back, and when I get to speak, I can at least hit the brakes a little bit, calm this thing down. So we got to make it better. Yeah. So anyway, but great job.
Thanks,
and today you talked to us about, or this weekend, you talked to us about relationships.
Yes.
And the love that's in relationships. And I loved the myths at the beginning, and you dealt just dealt with that masterfully.
Thanks.
And then you talked to us about relational love and marriage. But tell me what you said about marriage, if you were to sum that up in a few.
Yeah, I think the big thing was to kind of, I guess, demystify marriage as being like, because the way I like to say it, marriage is not for everyone. Like for me, it was for me. I'm not for or against marriage and relationships, but I think the big heart of the teaching was, the goal of a relationship is not marriage, but love. And from that's what, I guess, situates firmly and gives longevity to any relationship, is to have authentic, honest, open love with that person that you're with. And marriage can be that thing that you sign, it becomes a legality. And I said, that's not what makes a marriage. The love is what makes it, not the document or the legal papers that we have.
So when did we start? Most people may not know this, but marriage was not always a legal document.
That's right.
About when do you think it became a legal document?
It's hard to say. We know when the first marriage took place. The anthropologists tell us it was in Mesopotamia, and it was just a social arrangement to really legitimize offspring of the women in particular, tribal groups. But we do know in the church that the church began to stick its fingers into the construction of marriage around 1563 at the Council of Trent, is when the Catholic Church mandated that any marriage in its particular provinces had to have a priestly blessing in order to legitimize it in the eyes of, the council, the state, the federation, whatever it was. And that's when marriage became a sacrament of the church and became sort of a sacred element that the church could provide the community. So we do know that for a fact, that it doesn't become a religious ceremony until, the medieval age. So
Right. But in John, Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding at Cana of Galilee.
That's right.
So there were weddings that were done in the Jewish community and throughout history, but it really didn't become this legal document. I think in Moses' day, if he wanted a divorce, it was a simple thing, wasn't it? He just basically said, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and you're done.
That's right.
I mean, if that were the case, there'd be a lot of divorces.
That's right.
More than we have. About every argument, there'd be a big divorce.
It's funny you say that. I was talking with Esther, because I kind of practice my sermons on her, and she gives me a good response. And, one of the things she had brought up that I thought was interesting, she said, it's kind of funny that, 50% of marriages end in divorce, and that's irregardless of religious faith. And she goes, I wonder how many want divorce but stay married, out of that 50% that quote unquote make it. Like, how many of them have either thought about divorce or contemplated divorce or just staying in so that they don't have to go through the legal loopholes and loss? That would probably be an even bigger number.
Well, we stay for the kids, we stay for this, they become two people living in the same house at different ends of the house.
Yep. And
I remember a guy in Fort Myers years ago. He's passed away, he and his wife, but his name was Boyd, and her name was Edith. I won't tell you their last name, even though they're gone, but he told me one day, I was a young buck in my 20s, and he goes, Edith and I have never had an argument. We've been married 30 years and never had an argument. I went, wow. I mean, I don't think Becky and I made it through our courtship without an argument. So he goes, yep. He said, we found a secret. He said, I can kind of sense when she's had a bad day, and she senses when I've had a bad day. She goes to her side of the house. I go to my side of the house, and we just don't talk until we feel like it's all smoothed out. And I go, that is not the way it should be.
No.
There's all kinds of dysfunction in that methodology.
Yeah.
So it's, but in so going to that, then you launched in the concept it's not the result of marriage, but really we're looking at love.
That's
and
right.
you said some wonderful things about love in there, about what it means and some of the biblical words which are fun to play with.
That's right.
But even in today's society, 50% are ending in divorce.
Yeah.
And we looked at the Christian statistics, and you know those as well as I do.
Yeah.
It's the same.
It's exactly
I mean,
the same.
it's not. I mean, I jokingly say I've done 350 to 400 weddings, so about half of those have ended in divorce.
That's right.
But I also brag and say, but on the funerals, I am 100%. Every time I do a funeral, there's no
That's
breakup.
right.
There's no breakup. Nobody's come back from the dead. It's always final.
I remember I was working a long time ago at a more charismatic type church that believed in all these things, speaking in tongues or whatever. And I remember pastor was leaving and he was dressed up, and I said, "Oh man, Pastor Miller, where are you going?" And he said, "Oh man, I have a funeral I have to go do. I'll be back." And I said, "You sure it's not going to be a resurrection service, man? You know, going to go lay hands on the dead?" And he goes, "No, I think we're going to keep this one in the casket. We're going to go ahead and keep this guy in the casket."
Yeah, that's a pretty good line too, isn't
That's
it?
right. So,
But you said some things this weekend about love between man and woman, well, and more. But
right.
let me, before I jump into that, a biblical definition of marriage is what?
Oh man,
In the evangelical world, a biblical
it's one man and one woman. That's the evangelical sort of interpretation of how they sort of constitute, you know.
but that's a biblical definition, but it's inconsistent with the Bible.
That's right.
So let's go through for a second.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve, we don't know anybody but Adam and Eve, right?
That's right.
But Abraham,
Oh,
Sarah, and Hagar.
that's right.
And there's two that he took as to be his wife, had kids with both of them.
That's right.
And then Isaac, I think he just had one.
Rebecca, right.
Rebecca. Mm-hmm. And then, but then he had Jacob and Esau.
That's right.
And Jacob got married, worked 7 years. When Laban worked 7 years.
That's right.
And Rachel was his prize. But on his honeymoon, what happened?
Got the wrong lady. They brought him the wrong lady.
Yeah. The older sister woke up in his bed. Now, you tell me that a guy, you must have been pretty drunk
That's right.
to say, I worked 7 years for this beautiful girl.
Yeah.
And I wake up the next day and it's his sister. And I
That's
don't
right.
even know it till the next day.
That's right.
But then they immediately married Rachel after that.
That's
But
right.
he had 2 wives.
That's right.
How many did Solomon have?
Oh, innumerable.
Yeah.
It
So
was innumerable amounts. And then you add to that sort of the mistresses and the concubines that were allowed in that sort of culture. We have no real clear definition of a traditional biblical marriage. And I pointed a few of those out in the sermon of when a man was killed at war, his wife would now be betrothed to his brother.
Right.
And I'm like, does she have a say in that? No. Or Moses commanding the Israeli army to overtake a land, like kill the women and children and the men, but the virgins you can keep for your wives. Again, I don't know how I would feel if I were a woman in that particular situation where this guy just killed my family and well, now he wants me to love him and be his wife.
Oh. And there's another story that Judah.
Yeah.
Judah had a son who was married to Tamar, and his son was killed some way or died. So Tamar was married to the younger brother, and then he died. But the next brother was so young, he wasn't even old enough to have a wife. So meanwhile, Tamar had to wait until he got old enough, and Judah kind of neglected, like, hey, you've killed 2 of my sons. I don't want you to kill the third one. You know, curse on you or whatever. Maybe
Right.
she wasn't responsible at all, but he ignored it. And later on, she dresses up as a prostitute and sees her former father-in-law,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and he sleeps with her, and she gets pregnant.
That's right. I
And
forgot
there's a
about
whole
that story. That's right.
of Judah and Tamar, and he wants to have her stoned. But what's significant about that is when you look through the lineage of Jesus' birth, they go back and mention Tamar.
That's right.
So here's this one who was, killed the first husband, second brother, third brother's too young, slept with her father-in-law. What kind of, you go, that's almost like, it's almost like a Louisiana family.
That's right. That's right.
I use you instead of Tennessee
That's
this time. I'll use me next time.
Yeah.
But but at some point, you brought out the point. It's love.
Love.
And tell me what you said about love that you think had the greatest impact.
I think it was twofold. I used the Corinthians verse from Paul because I think there's some deeper things that Paul's articulating than we give credence to at a wedding. Like that's hard. I think Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 13 is just as difficult as Jesus is writing about the Beatitudes, like love your enemies. Because he said love doesn't envy, and it's patient, and it doesn't hold a record of wrong, like real love. And there are times even in relationships that when Esther and I fight, we may bring up something from the past, and that's not an expression of love. And so what I talked about was learning to love. Like the process of love is really the process of learning to love, educating yourself. Because Paul writes about God knows me and still loves me with this kind of love. So what I like to do is take love out of the Corinthians verse and put my name in it. Troy's patient. Troy's kind. Troy doesn't hold a record of wrong. And that is a reflection of God in me. When I'm able to do those things, I'm most reflective. I think that was, and then I talked about, this is why I can see someone who has a strength, and I love people's strengths, and I'm not going to get jealous or envious of their strengths. But I can also see their weaknesses, and I can love them even in their weaknesses and not be irritated or hold a record of wrong.
Right.
That hit me when I was studying that. Like, that's what real love is. And then the second thing, Paul writes, it's almost like a throwaway verse. He says, and love, how did he write it? He says, love doesn't demand that you view it in a particular way. And that's when I said, real love resists any restrictions placed upon it. And I said, think of the ways we've tried to place restrictions on love historically. By race. You can't marry a person of a different race. You can't marry a person of a different religion. Now the culture is you can't marry a person of the same sex.
Right.
And I wanted to address that head on, that at Suncoast we are absolutely inclusive when it comes to that. Now, of course, I think there's some legitimate restrictions on love because I don't think it is love. Like someone who loves a child, right? No, there are certain restrictions because that's not real love. That's not the biblical sort of understanding of God's love. And so in saying that, I think it really moved people because we have a few same-sex couples in our church, and they were absolutely just relieved to know that this is where we stand, and this is a place that they can feel that love given to them without judgment or intimidation. And so those were the big things that I think I said about love that resonated with people and took away this mythology of marriage.
Right.
Marriage is great. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I'm for it, and it's for me. But it's become something of a cultural conditioning as opposed to what I believe God's true intent is, and that's to love the person you're with.
No, I think that's well said. I remember a comedian saying something like this, marriage is a wonderful institution, but who wants to live in an institution? So, there's so many years, and Becky and I have been married, celebrated our wedding anniversary last week, 47 years, which is a long time, but it takes a lot of work to make a marriage happen. And there's, we've taught marriage enrichment, marriage classes, I read many books on marriage, continual thing to try to keep that relationship where it needs to be. But I think that this idea of love being what people are looking for, and the outcome that God is looking for is that people would truly love one another. And if they enter into a monogamous relationship with someone and they decide that's where they want to be for life, regardless of same-sex marriage or not. Yeah. It's they love someone. I remember talking to someone who had been married a couple times to a lady, been married a couple times to guys, and she's currently married to a woman. And someone complained and said, "Oh, she's gay, or she's a lesbian." And she said, "I don't." And I remember talking to her. She said, "I don't want them to put me in a category. I'm not gay." I said, "Really? So how would you like to be categorized?" She was teaching me. She said, "I want to be known as," and she told me her name.
Mm-hmm.
"This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for love, and I finally found it.
Yeah.
And I found it in this person rather than these others.
Yep.
And now I'm in a wonderful relationship, and my heart is full, and they have a family and the whole thing. But I want to embrace people like that and say, welcome to Suncoast.
Mm-hmm.
We're a hospital, not a courtroom.
That's
you
right.
can be at home here." And I thought you waved the flag of inclusivity
Mm-hmm.
and love and grace and conversation rather than confrontation.
Yeah.
I mean, you dealt with that very well too. And I thought it was well done. And if people have not seen this, I'll tell this to the online crowd. If you've not watched week 1 through 3 or 4, this was week 4
Right.
of Real-ationships, you
Yep.
need to go back and watch it. It'll be worth your time. And I want to thank you very much for spending a few minutes with me today.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to us talking again soon.
Thanks, Dr. Baucom.
My pleasure.